Salam Namaste. Salam Alaikum. Those from Pakistan. Namaskar to those from Bangladesh. Ni hao to those from Singapore. Ayubowan to those from Sri Lanka. And Namaskar for my Indian compatriots. I apologize to Brunei, Malaysia and Maldives for not knowing offhand what their salutations are. Thank you very much, Rahul, for inviting the oldies here. There are 5 of us who are sitting here. By moving there, we have increased the average age dramatically. I think I would like to add my own appreciation to what Ms. Ellis and our learned secretary have already mentioned, because we feel very honored that you would spend an evening listening to us. And I do not want to go into emphasizing the importance of entrepreneurship, how it's going to be the engine that is going to drive Asian growth, because the Secretary has already explained that and all of you know it. What I thought I would do is to entertain you a little bit. Otherwise you will be hearing only speeches. And I've chosen a subject which should be close to your heart. Innovation, which is the flip side of entrepreneurship. You can't be an entrepreneur if you're not innovative. And if you're innovative, you have to be entrepreneurial. So it's a heads and the tails of the same coin. And what I did to prepare for this evening is to reflect back in my long career in the business world. I have been largely in the corporate sector. And I've chosen 5 myths that exist about innovation. I'm going to talk about 5 realities, and I'm going to share with you 5 ideas. So there are 15 items, and I've got 45 minutes to finish it. So I'm going to take you on a helicopter ride rather than give you a long lecture. And to break the monotony, my wife assures me that my voice is not very pleasant. So I will break it with some video clips so that you'll be entertained. But more than entertained, I hope you draw your own lesson out of this. So thank you very much once again for being here. And so as I said, I'm going to talk about the myths first. And I shall literally touch upon what the 5 myths are. By the way, if any of you at all find this interesting, educative or instructive, I'm very happy to leave a set of the slides with Rahul. The first myth I want to talk about is that the belief that it is essential to be first in the market. I'm going to read out the myths and then the second is that the amount of R&D expenditure that a company or a country or a society spends is the measure of innovation. The third myth I would touch upon is that innovation is more difficult in services than in products. The fourth is that innovation is about very smart people making very big bets. They jump out of the bathtub and say, Eureka. Those are the innovators in image terms in our heads. None of you looks likely to jump out of the bathtub shouting Eureka, and yet you are also innovators. And the last is about culture and process. As I said, I'm going to run through them pretty quickly. Even if you do not agree with me, in fact, if you do not agree with me, that's all the better, because we are not here all to just agree with it. So let me touch upon this myth number 1, that it's essential to be first in the market. Innovators are always impatient people. They want to do things quickly, because they have been trained to think that the first mover has the opportunity to capture the market. The first mover can patent his product. So we believe that it's important to be very fast. Al Ries and Jack Trout, who are the gurus in advertising and marketing, positioning, have argued that it's better to be first than better. That's a highly arguable point, but they have said so. In reality, I'm not suggesting you should be slow or bureaucratic. All I'm suggesting is that there are no universal truths. There are well. And you have to get the balance right. Innovators should not be perpetually in a rush. Just like we tell our children, you don't have to do everything yesterday. It will develop. The truth of the matter is that if you research this, you'll find that those who were really first in the market have been forgotten because they failed. And what you see and imagine as the innovator who's first in the market is really the guy who survived. You don't know the species that way. Example, if I ask people who is the first personal computer, most people say Apple. But people of my generation know that it was not Apple which was the first personal computer. It was a company which is dead and gone now. It is called MITS, Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems. And when I was a young student, I recall that this company brought out the first 8-inch floppy disk personal computer. And in 1976, Business Week referred to MITS as the IBM of home computers. But if I ask any of you, have you ever heard of MITS? You say, never heard of it. The brand name was Altair, A-L-T-A-I-R. And Altair is not remembered by anybody. People think that Apple is the first and the most successful personal computer. So Altair came first. They were first in the market, but they did not survive. And to be a great innovation, you have to survive, whether you are first or second or third. Here's another example, copiers. Today you talk to anybody about laser printing, they would say that HP owns the market, Hewlett Packard. But actually, reprography has been going on for 100 years. And Xerox is the one that actually made the first printers. IBM pioneered printers, but those are forgotten. And today's management will tell you that HP is the one, and therefore you assume that HP is the innovator, the first in the market. They were not the first in the market. A very common product which you use when you have little babies in the house is diapers. And you ask, in most countries, who innovated the diaper, which is given so much of drudgery relief to mothers all over the world. People would say Pampers from Procter & Gamble. But Pampers was not the first one that made diapers. It is a brand called Chucks. And today nobody uses Chucks, nobody knows about Chucks. And they did it 11 years before Pampers. 11 years. And they are dead and gone. So the importance of surviving is somewhat more important than being first. And therefore to be in a frenetic hurry, as entrepreneurs tend to be, as innovators tend to be, in the false belief that being first gives you assured survival is a myth that I would like to challenge today. There are many other examples of people who, in image terms, you assume to be first in the market and not. During my own career, I have seen this. I have noticed, many of you are very young, so you will not know that the first browser was not Microsoft, it was Netscape. And Netscape, people thought would own the whole world, and they did, just for a short time. And then Microsoft took over, and now there are other challenges. I used to work in a company called Unity Earth, and we used to make consumer products like detergents and so on. And young people today might think that Surf was the first detergent. It wasn't. The first detergent in India was a product called Det. And my age group people will remember Det, but Det doesn't exist anymore. And so on and so forth. I've got other examples. I don't want to go into all of them. But I want to leave you with the thought about the first myth. That it's nice to be first in the market, but it's not essential. And being able to survive is more important. The second myth, people tend to look at R&D as a virtue by itself. If you read some of the world's international business papers, they tell you the R&D as a percentage of GDP, how many R&D dollars does a company spend, and that becomes the measure of its innovativeness. Traditionally, pharma companies spend a lot of money. But Boozer Company have done a study which shows there is absolutely no relationship between their innovativeness and the amount of R&D money they spend. Your own spends less R&D dollars than its peers, but it produces absolutely stunning innovations. So I want to shake the second myth that the more R&D you do, the more innovative you are, especially when you are entrepreneurs like yourselves who may get overawed by the R&D power and the muscle that large companies might have. The third myth I want to address today is that it's more difficult to be innovative in a service. If you're running an airline, you're running a restaurant, you're running a little software shop, you're running a hot shop ideas in advertising. At the end of the day, an innovation has to be magnetic. I use the word magnetic because it has to capture people's imagination, their passions, their mind. And the magnetism of a person or an idea is its functionality multiplied by its emotion. So you may have a product which is hugely functional. For example, you may carry your BlackBerry or your iPad. It's hugely functional. It gives you touchpad access to world information. It can also be emotional. Now, when you are marketing a service, and many of you will be entrepreneurs in services, how do you capture the emotion of a customer? Can that become an intellectual property? Why is the Taj loved so much? I'm not here to promote my own group. Taj belongs to the Tata group that I work. But people love the Taj. When 26/11 happened, people went for the Taj. You love your city. You love your village. So there's a lot of emotion attached in human responses, and innovation can play on that as well. And therefore I define emotion as such an important part of innovation. It is not rationality, R&D, analytics and science. That the last point on this chart says, emotion is the customer experience multiplied by the employee engagement. Each of you must be employing, 10, 20, 30, 100, 200 people. How do you capture the passion of those people that this is my life? That's worth a lot in innovation terms. And I'm going to take two examples. One is of Starbucks. Bombay has become the first place where Starbucks has opened its stores. They are a joint venture with Tata. And there's a book which all of you might have read by the author Joseph Michelin, who writes about how Starbucks became a unique experience. Now, you may describe Starbucks as a nice coffee shop serving nice coffee, but people don't pay $100, $200 just to go and have a nice cup of coffee at Starbucks. They go there because there is a magnetism about the experience of Starbucks. Even young college students go. That's why Starbucks has become what it has all over the world. There's such a strong link between the emotional experience. Starbucks says there are 5 principles that went, and that's available in this book that I'm showing you on the slide. They say, make it your own. They say everything matters. They tried so many combinations of music and table height and graphics around in order to capture the moment and the experience of people, their customers. Surprise and delight your customers. Embrace resistance and leave your mark. And I think as entrepreneurs, if I might offer to you a suggested reading, this book by Michael Capelli is worth your reading, Joseph Michelin is worth your reading, because it brings out the kind of spirit that entrepreneurs need to not only have themselves, but to create in their customers through their employees. And a very, very important reason why you have to have a bunch of engaged employees is brought out by a video clip that I'm going to show you. I refer to the fact that we had this most unfortunate episode 5 years ago, your worldwide well-known the attack of terrorists on the Taj. And we had a general manager in the Taj who, to his great regret, lost his family. He was staying up on the 6th floor of the hotel, and he could rescue his own wife and 2 children. But the whole hotel, the atmosphere of the hotel was one of working beyond duty. And I'm using this to demonstrate to you what the power of employee engagement can be. be in innovation, though the context of this is a unfortunate experience. Can we play that next slide, please? And I put the volume also. Can I just press it? Can I press again? Now? So 1 year after the event, the general manager of the hotel is being interviewed on CNN.
The general manager of the Taj Hotel, Karambir Khan, lost his family in those attacks. Parts of the hotel were completely destroyed, but a year later, Karambir Khan speaks to CNN IBN on the past 1 year. Raksha Shetty with this report.
General Manager Karambir Khan, who stayed on leading rescue operations from the front at the Taj for 3 days, even as his wife and 2 sons perished on the 6th floor.
The family died there, and I see them there. I can't let them down, otherwise we will let the terrorists win, which we have.
Now, 1 year later, though he says he's unable to heal, Khan is still leading his army as he struggles to restore his new family, the Taj, to its former glory.
We can be hurt, we can be knocked down. We are like on hotel. We will carry on.
Out of the total 30 people who died at the Taj, 10 were staffers, many of them chefs. Now the sea lounge, the poolside and the banquet rooms all have been restored in almost defiant splendor, with Khan overseeing the logistics of the restoration through the past year, often returning home only to sleep. By November 26th, exactly 1 year later, the hotel will throw open 3 of its flagship restaurants completely destroyed in the attack.
There's no point talking on what has happened. I think it's important that we look at it.
Back on his feet and still standing tall, Khan and the Taj are determined to spare no effort as they both bounce back.
I use that to illustrate the power and the importance of employee engagement. We have large institutions in all countries, in the government, in the public sector. The emotion of your employees who want to come to work, you don't know what benefit it will do to innovation and entrepreneurship. It is not the genius of yourselves alone that matters. It's bringing out the genius of the team of 10, 20, 30 people that you might have in your company. That's why I showed you that film. And I showed you one which is a very pleasant one, which is the Starbucks experience, and one which has an unfortunate and tragic context to it, but still brings out in a very emotional way what the power of commitment is. And that's why I showed that film. The fourth myth that I want to touch upon is about that innovation is all about very big bets. Now, if you happen to be a genius, if you happen to be Srinivas Ramanujan or Mozart, well done. Most of us would like to believe we are geniuses, but really in our honest moments we know we are not. And therefore you cannot work in innovation and entrepreneurship on the basis that you get that great aha moment and the big leap happens and you make your billions. That's the way the books are written. In reality, all of us are born innovative. Do that, and then they learn from that, the do's and the don'ts. And therefore I argue that to be innovative and entrepreneurial, as all of you are, you have to take little bets, not big bets. This story that you might read about somebody who went from rags to riches and made, I don't know, $50 million is nice, sexy stuff for the magazine. If you want to be a journalist, that's fine. That's not the way real life works. That's not the way it happens. You experiment, you do something, you play around with it, you immerse yourself in it. You then start to define some things in your mind and then you start to reorient yourself, you iterate it. That's exactly how a child learns. Think of how little kids in your family are learning things. They are curious. And this is the cycle that child psychologists have come across, which helps children to learn. And innovators and entrepreneurs instinctively, without any training, follow this path. And the last point I want to make about myths, chosen of the 5 myths, is that there's a strong belief in management circles, and if you go to attend training courses, people will tell you that discipline and process matter. I wonder whether culture matters more. There has to be an atmosphere in which people feel free to innovate. It can't just be about discipline and culture. So if you go to the innovation program, they will show you stage gate processes, how in a disciplined way you do things. But in some ways, if your culture is not promoting, and it's very difficult to change culture, it's not at all easy. So the cultural alignment of whatever business you are in, do your strategy. And I'm going to show you a video clip of India's most iconic business person. Happens to be my chairman. I'm not showing it to you because he's my chairman, but I think he's acknowledges. And here's what he had to tell us in an internal meeting about this culture of innovation. Can I? Sorry, I need your help. I'm not innovative.
In many cases, I find whenever you try to say something, what about the structure? What about the organization? There is my concern is innovation will not evolve necessarily because you create a structure. Innovation has to be part of the DNA of that organization, or somehow to bring out the creative strengths of our people. You don't need a structure for that. You can have an idea at 2 o'clock in the morning that wakes you out of your sleep. We need to have an environment that when you come into work and say, I had this idea and I believe it deserves some thought, that the company should not put you down. If that somebody should be able to see the value or not, or say that there's no value, but that there should be a means of not being frustrated with that. And that doesn't mean that stupid ideas have to clutter up people's working day. I'm just trying to say that we should create a space where we can in fact lead and do things differently and do things that others have not done. We will not, in the long term, in a global environment, ever be leaders unless we are also innovative.
That it's the culture of what you create, and that's a very difficult thing to influence. And each of you will have to learn, experiment, and figure out how to build an innovative organization. Then I want to touch upon 5 realities. I have finished with the 5 myths. And it leads very nicely from this last point about the importance of culture. We have to become childlike. How do you become childlike? By being natural, but not being artificial. So I get great inspiration from biology, from nature. That can you think of a subject in totality rather than in parts? I call it innovate holistically. You can think not only of a product, but you can think of a service, you can think of a business model, and that can be the heart of the innovation. You have to focus not on being first in the market, but being difficult to replicate. Right here in the city of Bombay, I do not know whether Rahul and Narayan are going to expose you. There's a system called the Dabbawala. Now, for those of you who don't understand Hindi, a dabba is a box, a tiffin box, a lunch box. We have. Oh, you seen that yesterday? So all of you are familiar with it? Now look, there are hundreds of thousands of wives in the city of Bombay who send their children to school, the husband goes away to work, and then they cook a hot meal at about 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. And then there's a bunch of guys who goes and collects these absolutely amazing system. It's been going on for I don't know how many decades, and as they must have explained to you yesterday. Now, if the wrong meal gets delivered to the wrong guy, the divorce rate in the city will go up dramatically. So please understand that this is about social harmony. If you say Suchitra has made a meal and it has reached Anil instead of Sunil, well, there's somebody will be answering for it. So the importance of these guys being right in their innovative model, we knew nothing about it. No Indian would ever talk about the Dabbawala. I grew up in the city, watching these Dabbawalas, some guys were just carrying. And then one day somebody came from Harvard or Wharton and said, this is Six Sigma. And he said, hello, what is Six Sigma? And suddenly these fellows became heroes, and they must have done a good show for you yesterday, putting on their caps, and now they become very, very Harvard oriented. But what did they do? They made a business model. It's an innovation. We have in India, and I'm sure it is there in Bangladesh, but Bangladesh has it certainly. Mohammed Yunus has done his microfinance. In India, we have Arvind Eye Care. They can do an eye operation, a cataract operation for $3 or $5. You can get a heart bypass done for a very inexpensive amount by innovating old business models. So when I use the word innovate holistically, focus on difficult to replicate, that's what I mean. But I want to draw your attention to the last point of this chart. The think biology and not physics. Because of the way we are educated, we pretend that we are very rational people. But most of us are acting irrationally most of the time. If you don't believe me, go and ask your spouse. He or she will confirm that you pretend to be rational, but most of the time you're irrational. My wife has convinced me that I'm irrational. And I have tried to convince her as well. So you look around nature, and you see a very, very different paradigm from the way we think about it. On the left, you see birds are flying. Have you ever seen a bird which is trying to fly? One fine day, the birds get up and they start flying. You see fish which are swimming. Have you ever seen fish which are going to training courses? But we go to training courses to learn how to manage, how to innovate. You see flowers which are blooming on the extreme right. Have you ever seen a flower which is trying to bloom and you are coaching it to bloom? No. But you see managers and entrepreneurs. Do you see them going to training courses and trying to manage, trying to be entrepreneur, trying to be innovative? Plenty of them. And that is what I mean when I say that somehow, in the way we are trained, we have lost our spontaneity. And therefore, the reality that I want to point out is that innovation must happen with a certain amount of spontaneity. And I find many lessons, shortage of time doesn't allow me to go through all of them, but you learn from the world of biology. And there are 4 rules in biology which will be very well applied to organizations. The first is that there are very permeable boundaries. Whichever way you are organized, things can cut across. The second is the number of rules are very few. You go to any government department, the number of rules are so many that you can't operate. You're completely stymied. My apologies to the secretary who's here. But this is not aimed at you, but large companies, including Tata's, tend to have lots of rules. Have you ever wondered why football is the most loved game anywhere in the world? Because it has very few rules. In football, you can touch the ball with any part of your anatomy which you are willing to put at risk. Any part of it, except you can't use your wrist. You can use any other part, the head, the chest, the shoulder, the back, the foot, anything. And therefore, if you watch a football game, in 5 minutes somebody can tell you what the rules are. And it's very enjoyable to see people trying to score a goal. Now try explaining cricket to somebody who doesn't understand cricket. If you're not British, or Indian, or Pakistani, or Bangladeshi, try explaining cricket to an American. You'll go nuts. And he'll go nuts. It has so many complicated rules as to where you can stand, when the new ball will come. You don't understand. So being simple and having minimum rules is very important. And so on. I've got 2 other points there. So this is the third reality, that you have to drive to get simplicity. And to learn about simplicity, you learn much more from biology and nature than from physics and engineering. The fourth point is that many of us come from countries which are not that well endowed. They're all up on the GDP curve. all innovation must satisfy some human want, something. And that doesn't matter whether it's bottom of the pyramid, top of the pyramid, or middle of the pyramid. There is scope for innovation in all these respects. If I stopped all of you and did a survey and said, tell me the great innovations, you would probably say iPad, iPod, and stuff like that. And I say to you, those are great innovations, but they serve very few people. But there are countries like yours and mine, where there are lots of people living who need innovations, which are not that visible. So I got what I call a triangle of triangles for innovation. The left-handmost triangle shows you that at the upper end, you get innovations that are research-led, iPod, iPad. And if you move to the next one, it tells you its degree of visibility. These are highly visible. You go to any country, anywhere in the world, people will be using an iPad and an iPod. But its societal impact is for a few hands. How many people can use an iPad and an iPod? How many people's lives is it revolutionized? 500 million? Out of the 7 billion people on this planet? And then you look at the so-called bottom of the pyramid, popularized by the late C.K. Prahalad. Those tend to be business model based. They tend to be value led. They are not very visible. You don't hear of them. How many of our delegates here have heard of the Dabawala or the Arvind Eye Care system? You haven't heard of them. Occasionally there's some case study written about it. But they benefit a very large number of families. And I want to draw your attention as the future entrepreneurs of your countries, that you must be able to look at the entire space of innovation rather than just look at the top end. I'm going to take one example which probably applies to all our countries in one form of degree or another. Do you know that half the people who occupy hospital beds in the world are there because they have suffered from a waterborne disease? Half the beds. If you can eliminate waterborne disease, you can save 50% of the beds around the world. So it's a big problem. Now, there are many solutions to make water pure, but they cost a lot. And I have been to the villages in my country, in Africa, and people say, my father and mother and my grandfather have been drinking this water, so nothing is going to happen to me. But it does happen. So we got a very simple, and I'm going to take an example and show you a quick video clip. You know, we all grow paddy. The rich part of the world eats wheat and corn. The poor parts of the world eat rice for some strange reason. With the exception of Japan, we are all rice-eating countries, and we are the poorer part. And the richer part, the West, consumes rice and corn, wheat and corn. So you take paddy husk, when you mill paddy, and you dope it with some nano silver, and it acts and removes all the bacteria. So we made a product, and I want to show you a quick video clip of it. I'm not going to tell you how it works because the video clip will tell you. And we put it into the market, and I'm showing this as an example. Not that Tata is very smart, because all of you are doing this all the time. But we must celebrate this. And I hope in seeing this video that I'm going to show you now, you get a very quick idea of how this is the world's most inexpensive water filter. A whole family of 5 can get pure water for 18 months for the princely sum of $3. And if I gave you as an engineer the task of creating a $3 water purifier using basic, it can't be done. So can I request you to play this? There's a very nice Irish music, so if you don't like the rest of the film, you'll enjoy the Irish music.
This might be on its own.
Sorry?
This might be on its own.
This might be on its own? a mother brings up a child is an innovation. No two mothers bring up their children the same way. The same mother doesn't bring up her two children the same way. She is constantly innovating. And I'm saying to you as entrepreneurs and innovators that you have to celebrate these. And not get stuck in a pedantic debate whether this is R&D led or whether this has got patents on it and so on and so forth. I want to show you there's a famous word in India which probably my Pakistani friend will understand. It's called jugaad. Jugaad means a quick fix. Okay? And this has now become an international terminology. You know, Harvard Business Review writes about jugaad. Some people write about it pejoratively. Jugaad means a quick fix, okay? And it's usually used in India in a pejorative way. Oh, he's a jugaadu, which means, you know, in Delhi particularly, many things can be fixed. And the guy who can fix those things is called a jugaadu. But I found as I travel around the world that there's an equivalent to jugaad in other countries as well. For example, I went to China. I don't know if I pronounced it right. It's called Ziju Chongqing. I'm trying my best. If there are any Chinese friends here, they can correct my pronunciation. And it means exactly the same thing. I went to Brazil, and they call it cambiara. And cambiara means a quick fix. I even found a German word for it in software. It's called Klugen. And those who are dealing in software industry say Klugen, clutch it. And they are all meaning the same thing. If there's a problem, fix it. Get quickly. Now, there's a very famous film, which I'm going to show you a clip of. If I tell you there was an innovation of Apollo 13, the moment I say Apollo 13, American space exploration, you think of very high tech, right? But I don't know if you remember what happened when Apollo 13 mission went down. There's a problem, an unexpected problem. And there was a catastrophe that was developing because the atmosphere inside the spaceship was getting polluted. Now the spaceship is out there, the mission control is out here. How do you fix it? So you know what they did? They actually just brought all the parts that were available on the spaceship, put it on a table. And the ground team said, using these parts, fix that problem. So then you could give them instructions. And that's how the spaceship was saved. And the carbon dioxide which was developing was stopped. I'm going to show you a film clip from Apollo 13. It's a very nice video clip. That again. That's Tom Hanks, the real Tom Hanks. This is not the Apollo 13. Volume.
Thank you very much, Jason. We would have got last week for you. We have you right 060. Then all your right part of that row 060. And then if you could give your oxygen tank to stir. Roger that. What do you need?
Nothing to do with tax.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem. We have a main pipe being underflow. We've got a lot of pressurization here, Houston. Just went offline. Oh, there's another master alarm, Houston.
Okay, well, there's no refresh. Maybe it was.
We got a computer restart. We've got a baseline fire domain. We've got multiple continuity, Houston. We've got a restart.
All right, I'm going in again. Jesus. It's like the carpet just got out.
Econ, what's your data tell
very proud of my country that we are able to conduct elections, where millions and millions of people are voting through electronic voting boxes, which are set on the back of a rhinoceros, an elephant, a camel, and we are able to conduct free democratic elections. The United States of America can't do it. Electronic voting is not even allowed in many countries. Which innovation book is written about it? Some of our bureaucrats are sitting and just chucking away at it. I think it's a huge innovation. Do you know how many people India elects every year? Every 5 years, we elect 3 billion people. I said this in Switzerland, and they said that's half the population of our country. I said, yes, you're quite right. It's half the population of your country gets elected. Can you think of an electoral system that India has? We will try to replicate it. We will find it impossible. I think innovation and entrepreneurship, we always blame our public sector for being uninnovative. And there are many other examples, by the way, where the public sector has also innovated. And I think it is important that we celebrate these as we take your journey of entrepreneurship forward. I would hope that all of you will be entrepreneurial. I'm going to show you a last clip and then we close. My time is over. To show you that the most common things which you just even don't think about as being innovative. I ask you a question because I know you don't know the answer. Who has the world's largest table salt business? It's in India. It happens to be Tata. It happened completely by accident, for a lot of hard work. Now, salt is a very interesting product. You can't consume too little of it, you will die. If you consume too much of it, also you will die. So you have to keep a very narrow bandwidth. But salt is a very emotional subject. In every language you say namak haram hai, salt is very emotional. Now how come we managed to produce a brand called Tata Salt? It's India's #1 food brand, by the way, and it is launched. And I'm going to show you how salt is. We sell almost 1 billion tons of salt. Right? We are another billion. No company anywhere in the world has a single brand that sells that. Okay, we have 1.2 billion people eat salt. So a lot of promotional activity went in. But look how the idea came. We have a factory which is sitting on the west coast of our country. We needed water to run our factory. So we pumped seawater, evaporated, and took the water, and then we were left with the salt. We didn't know what to do with the salt. So we kept having mountains of salt. Until an entrepreneur like yourselves came and said, you know something, this is worth a lot of money. Will you allow me to call it Tata? I will put it into a plastic packet. I'll set up filling machines, give jobs to lots of people, and I will go shop by shop. And so it's the world's first completely outsourced model, where the packaging, the quality control, the invoicing, the distribution, the sales, the branding, the promotion was all given outsourced. And gradually over the years, it became. And it was done in the very state where Gandhiji led the famous Dandi Salt March. Some of you from other countries may not know how emotional salt can be. But back in 1930s, Gandhiji said, we want to show the British that we want independence. And I'm going to break the law that imposed taxes on salt. And I'm going to show you a very moving clip of Gandhiji. If I can ask for your help again, that will be the last time. Well, after this I shall close. very great symbolism. If you ask somebody who's at innovation, once I tell you, you say, wow, great innovation. And therefore, I would like to close by showing you slides. I think I've shown you 3 or 4 videos, and that's adequate. I want to close by saying, you and I, we're all very fortunate that we are living in a part of the world which is changing the course of history after 250 years. 250 years ago, this was the rich part of the world, and that was the poor part of the world. I still remember the historian who has written that in 1604, there was an Englishman who arrived at the port of Surat and went all the way to Delhi to meet Emperor Jahangir, who was ruling India at that time. And he wrote a tour report in which he has said, there's nothing that England makes today which is remotely of interest to this country. But everything I see in this country is of great interest to England. And then arose the course of history. We are about to reverse that. Not by making England poorer. The English can do that for themselves. We don't take it. But by reviving and cleaning back our place in economic history, we cannot deal with the kind of poverty that we have been condemned to suffer for so long in all our countries. The degree varies. And therefore you are pilgrims on this journey. The reason why, although I've just returned from Delhi this morning, I accepted Rahul's invitation to come here, is you have the faith of my generation which is now passing over the baton, as it were. And I would even like to wish you all the best. It's never happened, that 1 billion plus people, and if I include China, you would say 4-5 billion people, are going to reclaim their place in history. And I'm particularly proud, which is not to the discredit of other countries, that India is leading this way in its own, by a democratic process. Democracy will deliver results. And India is very proud, although people think of it as a moderate country, I'm very proud of what is happening in this country. Not because of our government is great, our politicians are wonderful. That's not the point. Society as a whole is undoubtedly moving forward. And you entrepreneurs have a great role in this. You are not just running small businesses. You are contributing to economic development in your country. I came to say, God bless you. Do it well.